AI systems do more than capture and replicate expertise. Part of our role as human beings in thinking about this stuff is bringing our metacognition, our awareness of how we prompt and guide the tool, try to shift the things that are naturally fears around AI into curiosities.
Welcome to the launch of Teach for All's AI AAA series. I'm Rhonda, and I'm here with my colleague Stephen to welcome Reid Hoffman to discuss AI's role in education. Welcome, Reid.
Great to be here. I love the work you guys do.
Thank you. So, Reid, although I'm sure you know the story, for the benefit of everyone here, I want to briefly share background on Teach for All with its remarkable network reaching 63 countries, 15,000 in-program teachers, and 125,000 alumni. More than half of our alumni remain in the education and social impact sectors, and we also have a dedicated staff across our network partners who keep this unique global education organization innovating through collective leadership.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks, Rhonda, for that background. And Reed, just to double down and say it's such a privilege to have you join us as we launch this series, even more so given you're jumping right back into founder mode, which is exciting to watch and to see that you've got skin in the game, which is amazing. Having launched Manus AI in early 2025 with Dr. Siddharthi Mukherjee, transforming medical research with the power of AI. The parallels to education are compelling. Both fields have struggled with slow development cycles and opportunity costs. And what I love about what you're building at Manus is that you're not just searching for existing solutions. You've created a model through Project Cosmos to find, and if I understand correctly, and we'll dig into this later, even create missing puzzle pieces for unsolved problems in cancer research. And I think that idea, creating missing puzzle pieces, is where it gets really interesting in terms of the parallels of the journey we're on in education. But we'll let our community guests explore those bigger questions with you shortly. Okay, Rhonda, over to you as we kick off the first of the AI AAA series, Building Brighter Futures Faster. Reid Hoffman on AI's transformative power.
Thanks, Stephen. So, Reid, we're going to explore your work through the same framework that guides our AI AAA series. Those three lenses we mentioned: aspirations, ambitions, and apprehensions. Let's start with aspirations. At Manus AI, you're working with Nobel laureates and top cancer researchers to use AI for drug discovery. You said that these brilliant minds aren't being replaced by AI, they're being empowered by it. Tell us about Manus AI, your journey so far, and what early signals confirm your aspirations that AI can help us do more than simply capture and replicate expertise.
There's a couple levels. So one, already today, AI systems do more than capture and replicate expertise. That doesn't necessarily mean they're in many cases replacing kind of major swaths of human labor. There will get some places where there is replacement, but there's a set of different things where they are capable at what you think of as superhuman quality. Like for example, speed. Like when like for example, take my investor hat on. When I'm doing due diligence on a business plan, a company, I can feed that in and get kind of a anticipatory roadmap of what the due diligence should be in about 4 minutes of compute, which would probably take, an associate at the venture firm 2 or 3 days to do, right? It won't be perfect. It'll be less good than the 3 day one, but obviously, if you put the associate and the AI together, then all of a sudden at minute 15, you're off to the races because they've edited. They said, oh, question number 2 is the real one. Question number 5 is the real one. Question number 4, if we get to it, not that important, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of ways doing it. So the speed is already there, much beyond just capturing and replicating. The other thing, of course, that is, and I'll get to the specific things in a second, but is already possible within AI, and I know that we're in an educational thing, is cross-domain parallels and integration. So, for example, one of the things I started very early when I was, kind of first exposed to GPT-4 because I was on the board of OpenAI at the time and, had early access, is I said, okay, what are the intersections between GPT-4 and AI development and Wittgenstein's theory of language games. And you can do this kind of intersection. So you have this kind of curiosity and an ability to do that. And by the way, it was good. It wasn't as good as a professor or two professors who each knew each very well, really crafting it in depth. But it was also, by the way, done in 3 minutes, right? As a way of doing it. And part of what people are elaborating in the general AI space is how do you get it to do 15 or 20 minutes of compute work in really good ways. And so your answer is even a lot better and how that works. Now, for Manus, part of the reason why we emphasize the amplification part is because is not because look, if I could create an AI drug researcher that then would be, press button, get another drug researcher, that's really good for humanity. We would love to have, a million drug researchers working on cancer and all the rest. It's not available now. It may not be available even in 50 years. It's unclear exactly how that plays. A lot of Silicon Valley people tend to talk about like we're creating AGI, superintelligence, etc. And by the way,
Yeah.
in ways already we have superintelligence. But what we're doing, and this is part of the thing about expanding human capabilities, and I'll say the medicine one because I know that we'll do the educational parallel. What we've essentially realized is that we can use AI for what it's spectacular at, which is think of AI as almost like a search engine. And what you're doing is you're searching for targets and small molecules that will blend with those targets that will have a therapeutic, possibly decisive therapeutic effect, but at least a good one. Answer questions around toxology and a bunch of other stuff, by the way, which it cannot do perfectly. We cannot simulate the human biological system in any silicon system right now. But it can create, like in a search engine, it can create a set of here are 20 different possibilities of what might happen. Hey, you really bright scientists, how would you direct me in looking at these 20? Here's how I'd rank them. Would you rank them the same way? Should we investigate them the same way? Are there any elaborations or developments you would like me to do in order to look at this? I can do it at the speed of minutes in order to be generating it. And so allows a human, kind of drug researcher, creator, PhD, professor, etc., to move much faster within the testing hypotheses. Because part of what I think we're like one way of looking at it, if you look at education or reasoning, classically people talk about induction and deduction a lot, right? Induction, kind of points from a curve, deduction, logical things. I actually think what we're moving into an area, which I think a lot of most important human thought instance is an abduction. And the AI can actually help us with abduction. And that's essentially what we're doing at Manus. I can do a much longer answer, but I'm trying to stay compact so we can get to the education things.
That was brilliant, Reid. Thank you so much. And it actually just bleeds straight into our next section, which is, of course, ambitions. And so you've brought together this team of researchers, oncologists, chemists, biologists, mashing them all together. So, what are your ambitions for how Manas AI will shape the future of research itself? And you've sort of touched on this already. So, are we heading towards this human AI collaboration as a new model for breakthrough discoveries, or are we talking about something even more fundamental?
Well, I think um, it's human AI, but it's a little bit more than simply, hey, like it's a new use of the computer. There is, like, by the way, our computer interface is going to completely change. Like, if you're not, one of the things I talked a lot about last year, which I started doing, is being voice pilled. You speak much faster than anyone, even the fastest typist type. And so that gives you, and AI doesn't just, like, AI transcribes the essence of what you're saying. Like, you can kind of babble at it, and it will create coherent sentences that are pretty close to what you're actually intending, if not, with some degree of kind of change and iteration on it. So that human plus AI acceleration, that amplification, right, is actually in fact a much bigger deal than one might normally think because it will change the boundaries of how we think of epistemology. It's like a microscope change our epistemology, a telescope change our epistemology. Our AI tools do that as well. And one of the things that we'll have to kind of think about, like, for example, classically, when we think about thinking, we think, I sit in a library with a book and a pad of paper, and I think about it really hard. Well, a lot of thinking these is going to move. Not all. Some of that will still be there. Will move to more of a video game style. Like, for example, the way that I work with my team personally is I go, oh, I have a thought. I do an AI prompt. Matter of fact, actually, good AI prompting is I give it a prompt to tell me the prompt to run. Then I run that prompt and get it. And I look at the prompt that it gave me, sometimes mod it, and then run it, and then that. And I look at that and I go, is that close enough to the kind of things that I'm thinking? And I will ship that off to my team, right? Like when I had an idea, because one of the things we're doing for showing the ability to have AI increase the realm of imagination and possibility, I created a holiday record. I have zero musical capability, but I created a holiday record for my friends this Christmas, and it was so good. We're going to do some more. And like one of the ideas that I had was, well, I always liked Magritte's "This Is Not a Pipe." Could we create a Valentine song? This is not a Valentine song, inspired by Magritte's "This Is Not a Pipe." And I could, within the idea to the generation, have a coherent thing in 15 minutes that's like, okay, how would I improve that and refine that in terms of what I'm doing, in terms of the scope of imagination? That's an illustrative possibility for what kinds of things we can do in computational chemistry, in kind of, models of biology. Now,
Mm,
obviously, the models are models. They're not necessarily, you still have to get various ways where you touch biological substrates because, one of my favorite expressions is in theory, there is no difference between theory and practice. And so it's like it's theory. And by the way, theory is frequently right, but when it's not, it's really important. And so, and it's also right when it has sometimes right, it's also very important. But it's like that kind of thing. And so it accelerates this thinking process. It changes our way of how we think about knowledge generation. When do you have, like, for example, even when I'm doing research using deep research prompts, I now, because I do probably two or three deep research prompts a day,
mm,
I now have a sense of, oh, is that right or not? I'll give you an example, actually. It was funny. I was talking to Atul Gawande, because obviously I've been doing a whole bunch of medical stuff. Atul's a friend. He's working on a new book on anesthesiology. And I said, have you used AI yet? He said, no, I don't. And I was like, okay, let's like give me one of your hard problems. We'll sit down in front of the computer together. And I typed out something. And it came back with 10 examples of the exact kind of things he was looking for. He said, oh my God, there's magic. I was like, well, my spidey sense tells me at least a couple of these are wrong. So let's send them to your researcher. Now, the hilarious thing was I thought two or three were wrong, seven were wrong, right?
mm,
Like, e.g., if he had quoted seven of them, it would have been complete out
mm,
hallucination fiction. But what the researcher came back with was not like, oh God, this is garbage. Among other things, three. When you get 30 minutes, you get three good research. She also said, actually, in fact, five of these seven ones pointed me at original manuscripts, even though they hallucinated to try to create what you wanted to hear, that were gold for what we're looking for. Because again, AI is kind of a search engine. And you think about that as anything in the context of search engine. And so biological space, biological papers and research, data, models, like all of that becomes an amplification.
mm,
And now part of our role as human beings and thinking about this stuff is bringing our metacognition, our awareness of how we prompt and guide the tool, how we synthesize it, when it sounds like completely right, mostly right, somewhat right, maybe not right, etc., and how you're navigating it. And that's part of what the modern world of human thought is actually going to be.
So, building on what you were saying earlier, Reed, you mentioned speed several times, and I think at Manus, you're moving 100 times faster than traditional drug discovery. You're
We're trying to get
analyzing.
faster than that too, but yes.
Okay, 1,000 times faster.
Goal, goal,
Analyzing
goal,
molecular
goal, not yet, goal.
goal, analyzing molecular interactions at speeds that used to take months or years, but speed can't compromise safety. So, what are your apprehensions about operating at a pace that's wholly unfamiliar to researchers, clinical trial systems, and even regulators? What keeps you up at night in that area?
Well, maybe there's three answers. And I'll get to the one that actually has some real, apprehensions. But the first one is let's not be slow about deploying AI for the benefit of humanity. Because, for example, if we go really slowly, how many thousands of people die from cancer because we didn't get there, right?
Yeah.
So that's one. Like it's kind of like, and by the way, it's weird to be changing your thinking speed, your pattern, etc. Like we have, like I've heard a lot of arguments. Wow, but I didn't. Like I learned to write, very slow and deliberately, and this speed is going to underwrite my cognition. It's like, look, if you want to go handwrite your essay with a pen, you're welcome to. That'll take even longer,
Yeah.
right? And so it's the question of, it's not to say, look, we will lose things, but the question is, how do we gain so much more than we lose, and we patch, the sufficient things out of what we lose, and that's the speed game.
Okay.
Um, but it's going to be difficult. There's going to be a lot of resistance to doing it. It's part of the reason why you need an entirely new company. You can't just go to, you know, GSK and Eli Lilly and Pfizer and say, change your process. They're like, nope, we lack a process. Um, and so now you also want um, speed and safety when you get to the FDA. And the problem, of course, is the FDA is going to like one of the things that's been a learning process out of this is the FDA goes to a no failure target, which is frequently a mistake, right? So, like, for example, zero failures actually, in fact, means that your net gain is a lot less than it could be. And so, for example, one of the complicated things is if you get something like cancer, actually, in fact, when you're trying to treat something, you should actually try to treat it with a combination of two or three things. But the FDA will only approve things one at a time, which means that the combinatorial space is actually, in fact, really complicated. So, like one of the questions when I started thinking about like AI and what the FDA should do is like, well, how do we understand a good probabilistic safety model, e.g., very high probability, not 100, but very high probability in combination, where we could then allow, patients who might go, I'm at death's door, I'll try the three, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
among other things, I'm scheduled to die anyway. And if it works, maybe I get a little bit, but I'm also become the contributor to fighting this for humanity and other kinds of things. And so those kinds of things for changing it, yeah, that's going to be super hard. We're going to have to be a big company before we can make that happen. But it's kind of maybe I'm sneaking in an aspiration into my apprehension. Now, but
That's
now to a
totally
real
okay.
apprehension. So part of the thing that's boggling, so we are highly responsible people trying to create, kind of um, therapies that save lives. And cancer kills everyone, kills 2 years old, kills all genders, all races, et cetera, et cetera. So like this is a global disease thing. And there's certain kinds of cancers that more or less, not just even when you, like most kinds of leukemia, once you get them, you're just kind of hosed, right? There's like even like chemo, like it's already distributed across your body system. Surgery doesn't work, et cetera. And chemo, which by the way, think about how barbaric chemo is. Like we're killing the cancer and killing you at the same time, and our hope is that we kill the cancer before we kill you. Like whoa. And so now that's great. But the same things usable by bad people are biological poisons, diseases, weapons. Like, okay. Like, by the way, these capabilities existed anyway. And I actually think that the AI is the best defense for pandemics, whether they're man-made or natural. But you're putting more powerful tools in the hands of human beings. And I think most rational people could say, hey, if I could wave a wand and say nuclear weapons were not actually possible to invented, we'd do it because we're worried about what one idiot might do with a nuclear weapon, right? And we have that worry on the disease side too. And so one of the things that kind of leads to that we do a lot with Manus is, well, what are the things that we need to keep very tight in terms of information security? What are the ways that we need to suggest what the governance of this kind of technology is? What is the way that in a growingly chaotic world where international governance is definitely on a downward slope, courtesy some administrations, um, to be very polite on this, um, kind of like, what do we do in order to navigate that? And that's actually where my real apprehensions are, because it's a superpower and we're using it as a superpower for good, but it's also deployable. People could build a superpower for bad.
Great AAAs, Reed. Those are going to go down in history as our launch AAA. So thank you so much for that, Reed. But now we're going to get to the good stuff. We had over 150 people from our community request to submit questions to you today live. So we're thrilled to have five of our AI Literacy and Creative Collective members joining us live to ask their questions directly. These voices represent thousands of educators across our network who are actively shaping how AI shows up in classrooms around the world. Our first question comes from Amane Ajam Jawar, teacher from Teach for Lebanon, joining us from Tripoli.
Yes, thank you so much. Actually, my question is if we fast forward 20 years, what do you think will be the AI applications that we look back on and we say we shouldn't have done it that way?
Interesting. It's very hard to make predictions here. Great question. It's very hard to make predictions here because um, I think that um, 80 or 90% of the predictions that are being made about AI are too simplistic, ranging from everything from, oh, look, it's just a new tool to, on the deflationary side to, we're all going to be in a Star Wars universe where AI is going to be doing all the productivity and we have to figure out what that means. The whole range and everything in between. Now, I would say the biggest risk of something that we would say 20 years from now, maybe it's in a little bit in this thing is, and this is a very good audience with the work you guys do on this, is the natural economic thing is to focus on technology that replaces human labor. And by the way, it's good to have technology that replaces human labor. It's part of what enabled moving from farms to cities and all the rest. That is not inherently a bad thing. But the natural economic model is to really focus on that. I think we want to make sure that there is extra weight put on how do you do human amplification. It's one of the reasons I wrote the book Super Agency, and then before that, Impromptu. It's one of the reasons I do the podcast Possible, is I'm trying to kind of say, hey, it's fine to be doing replacement things, but let's also put serious energy, as much energy, ideally more, but it's hard with economic models, into human amplification. And I think because it's not just the question of productivity, which is good, but also how we find meaning in our work and lives and what we're doing. And it will change, by the way. People say, "Hey, I found," like for example, before cars, lots of people found their meaning in horses and grooms and carrying, buggies and all the rest of the stuff. And a lot of that stuff goes away. There are far, far few horses for transport now than there were before. And so the meaning, but it's like new meanings. But you need to have human meaning in it. And I think that under development of, call it, the meaning side of it is one of the things that I think is probably one of the more subtle things that we're likely to fumble.
Our next question comes from Pietro Story, a PhD student at the University of Torino and an alumni of Teach for Italy.
Hi, so my question is in an era where AI is generating new forms of autonomous and personalized learning, what do you think are the invisible trends that could refine or even challenge the role of public education as a common and democratic space for learning? I mean, in your view, what less visible transformation are truly taking place in how we learn and construct knowledge in the age of AI?
Well, so within the educational institutions, all of you are much more expert than I. I have started thinking about, like, if you were to create a new university where you did as much as possible with AI, what would that look like? Kind of the more subtle things that I think are people haven't really focused on is AI for assessment really changes everything in terms of the kind of the teaching and educational process. Give you a small example. I'm not saying it's happening at all yet, but I think it's easily, like, it's line of sight doable today. If you said, hey, I'm teaching a class on X, and you can take the final as early as and often as you want, because the final is essentially an exam one-on-one by the AI. I know I'm the kind of learner that I would like to take the first issue of the final at like day 3, right? To get a sense of like what it is I don't know, like what is the road ahead, what is I don't know. And I'd probably like to take it at, like, say it was a 10-week course, at week 3, week 7, and week 10, right? As a way of getting a sense of it. And it's a little bit like parallel to the video game kind of thinking way of doing this. Now, I'd say that AI is unquestionably the best learning technology we've made. And now it's, obviously without books, we couldn't get there, but it's even better than the books, because if people haven't done this, is one of the things I started doing as early as GPT-4. I'll look at something that's complicated. Say, for example, I now know a whole bunch more about computational chemistry than I ever knew before. I have zero professional study of chemistry, but I will take a paper and I will stick it into, Gemini, GPT-5, etc. And I will say, explain this to me like I'm 12. Then I'll go, okay, explain this to me like I'm 18. Okay, explain this to me like I have a college degree, right? And as it marches through it, I'm learning things about, like, it's starting with kind of simple metaphors and it's scaling up. Like, so I can use this as a tool already to quick step up my way from kind of simple metaphors into more detailed understanding and explanations of it. And that learning mechanism is already available to anyone who has access to these, foundational models. And I'm sure you all know, everyone on this call knows, that if you simply meta prompt the thing into, don't give me the answer, dialogue me to the answer, that it also gives you a quick hack at a tutor. So the problem is with institutions, and educational institutions are not the only ones, but the problem with institutions is institutions kind of more serve their institutional logic than any individual models. And by the way, I agree with Alpha School. I did a possible interview with Mackenzie Price on it, and they are going to try to make Alpha School as globally available as possible. They have a deal. I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say about it, right? But as the work just isn't on the chat side. But I think that the question is it's relative, like the institutions tend to go, we want to keep our institutional coherence. We want to keep how is it we teachers work together? How is it we do assessments? How do we compare assessments from month 1 to month 2, from year 1 to year 2, et cetera, et cetera? How do we have it predictable? All that sort of thing. And of course, AI, kind of massively disrupts all of this. But and so it makes it challenging for institutions. But I think it's important, and this is, by the way, same thing happens with companies. Like if you look at what startups are doing vis-a-vis what large companies are doing and adopting AI to be productive, the startups are, to earlier conversation with Rhonda, 100x what the big companies are right now, because they don't have the institutions standing in the way doing things. And so that's the thing that we need all of the institutions to do. It doesn't mean there won't be foot failures, doesn't mean that there won't be things at work. But part of what institutions try to do is avoid any failure, because the failure is then used to criticize the institution and criticize specific leaders. And they go, well, better not to take a risk. And actually, in fact, what we need to be doing in these times of disruptive transformation is taking risk and allowing people to take risk in order to do it. Now, the folks in the chat pointed out Alpha Schools. I think that's a good example. ASU, Arizona State University, is trying to do various things in this. I think those are some of the areas where I can see what's happening, but don't be slow down or necessarily wait or delay for those. Start playing with the free models today.
So next up, we have Ivan Nenenko, Head of Education, Teach for Kyrgyzstan, joining us from Tokmak, Kyrgyzstan.
Hi, Reid. So I'm coming from Kyrgyzstan, and I'd like to ask you a question about challenge we are facing in emerging markets. So I work with teachers and students in here, and like $20 for AI subscription is peanuts, like pocket change in Silicon Valley. But here, it's weeks of lunches and quite a sum of money. And also, the other problem is that some of the jobs that usually was those like starting career points, like basic coding, data entry, they're being automated by AI. So
Mm.
in all this situation, what opportunities do you see for emerging markets like Kyrgyzstan in this AI-driven economy? And what would be your advice for educators like me in preparing the next generation here?
So obviously, one is to try to engage with AI as much as possible. I do think it transforms the landscape of what entry-level jobs look like. But one of the things I've been telling, kind of university students, in the US and Europe and some parts of Southeast Asia, haven't gotten to Kyrgyzstan on that. My assistant was born in Kyrgyzstan, um, is is basically say, look, your differential edge is your knowledge of AI. The older generations, the 40-year-olds, the 50-year-olds, they don't know AI. That you can embrace that and be the person who's usefully bringing that into, whatever particular company or career or job you want, and that's what people are going to need to leverage and to use. Now, the economic thing about getting accurate, like good enough models, cheap enough, and so forth, it's one of the things that I know that there's a lot of different thinking institutions that are trying to make sure that the benefits for AI productivity are not only the wealthy countries. It's one of the things that I've been, over a decade kind of doing some work with the Catholic Church about. Not Catholic, it's just, good institution trying to do right for billions of people who might otherwise, um, you know, be left behind in some significant ways. And so let's not do that. I think, part of the thing that what I would hope for conversations like this week at Davos and so forth is to say, how do we make sure that there's enough good provisioning? I mean, one of the things that I've told the governments that I talk with is that one of the things that you could be doing as part of foreign policy is provisioning, kind of they may not be the best models in terms of how to do this, but at least the sufficient models for being on that journey. Because it is true, all the industry is trying to figure out how to make it as cheap as possible. One of the amazing things about AI is intelligence becomes available at the cost and scale of electricity. But also, by the way, electricity is not free. So they're all working on trying to how to bring the cost down as close to electricity as opposed to call it 3x electricity. How do you make it 1.1x electricity? And then how do we do stuff with electricity? And I think trying to figure out how to draft on that, but it's kind of like what are the set of things to do? I think it's a good challenge, and I'd say none of the key labs are really working on it other than just trying to bring the cost down.
Our next question is going to come from Gaurav Singh, a Teach for India alumni from Goa.
So I love this scene in The Matrix, where our hero Neo needs to learn Kung Fu, and I'm sure you remember that scene. He closes his eyes, they boot a program, and he opens his eyes and like, I know Kung Fu. So my question is, which of these two options do you see as our future, right? So option one is where AI helps me know Kung Fu, and option two is where AI knows Kung Fu for me.
Hmm.
So in option one, AI is the ultimate tutor. Whatever I want to learn, it creates the personalized plan for me and helps me become a master of that. And in option two, AI is the ultimate tool. So I get good at using it, and then it goes and learns whatever it needs to learn and goes from there, right? So do we go to a world where we master more skills because we have the ultimate tutor? Or do we go to a world where we master this, how to use this ultimate tool, and it learns and does things for us?
This may not surprise you, but the answer is both. And part of it is that it is a tutor for learning things. And I think there's a lot of different reasons why we'll want to learn things, not just for, I learn Kung Fu or I learn coding or I learn whatever and I now deploy it. There's many things we learn as part of our human development. Our development as members of our community, our development for ourselves, our development for, kind of, and also for work things. But like, for example, if you kind of go to, like, say, replace chess with Kung Fu, you get an interesting question here because chess, no human's ever going to beat a computer, again in chess. I mean, not really. I mean, that'll be a very interesting universe. But on the other hand, we have more people playing and watching humans playing chess than we had in history because it kind of has a sense of just like, very few people are gold medal athletes, but everyone else kind of gets into the process. And so it is a tutor. It will play into those kinds of things, even in the things where in a productive work sense, it's better to just have the computer doing things relative to cost of productivity. But on some things, in terms of the ultimate tool, you go, and I'm going to use your option 2 to kind of launch to a sense of what I think is the most likely, large set of possibilities. But what I think within a small number of years, anyone who has access to AI deploys to their work with a set of AI agents that they and others are configuring in order to do the work, and they manage, like there's no longer an individual contributor. Everyone's managing a flow of a set of AI agents in terms of how they're operating. And as part of that, AI agents, we bring in metacognition, we bring in a kind of a sense of awareness of, is this doing the right thing? Is there something bold to do differently? And it doesn't mean that AIs wouldn't be also good at the various forms of intermediate management, but it's supposed to is like, I know Kung Fu. It's like I'm bringing the Kung Fu team and I'm kind of saying, here's the different kinds of things we're going to try. And, oh, you gave me 3 different options. Actually, a variant of option number 2 is probably the one to kind of try first for various reasons and so forth as ways of doing it. And I think that's where, human labor is likely to persist for a long time, even in highly predictive, like kind of highly capable AI systems for doing that. And for example, like I recently, a couple months ago, did a debate on stage about why human doctors wouldn't go completely away. Now, by the way, we already have, and this is one of the things we should be driving towards, is ability to provide a medical assistant that works on a smartphone that costs less than $5 an hour to run. We should do that. Massive benefit to the entire world for making that happen. And to anyone having access to a smartphone has a GP. But the reason why, even if the AI gets so much better than human doctors, even the top 1%, you still have the need for how do you navigate the AI system? What are the human conditions? Like, oh, you have a cancer, you should start your treatment immediately. It's like, well, but you want to walk your daughter down the aisle on Friday. And that's an important part of life. Start Saturday, right? So, that kind of thing is part of the places where there's a lot of places where the kind of human fabric will continue. And I think maybe the last point of it is we humans are going to have this kind of difficult set of how do we step aside from our egos of saying, well, I used to be really good because I was a really fast essayist. And now AI is a faster essayist than I am. And it's like, okay, great. I have to relocate my identity and I have to think, oh, there's ways in which I can work with AI to make really good, more targeted, more better, more elevated for human circumstances and other kinds, how those essays work. And that's kind of that reshift of ego is, I think, one of the things that's going to be difficult for most people to learn. Human beings aren't usually good at matters of evolving their ego, but I think that's going to be, important.
Amazing. Thank you, Reid. You're doing such a great job here. You're going right across the country now. Our last question is from Alejandra Rubio Lopez, an alumna of Enseña por Mexico.
As a professor at an intercultural university, I am concerned that AI models are primarily with data from the global north. So if AI is the co-pilot of the future, how can we prevent from erasing indigenous worldviews and languages that are not digitized What strategies do you suggest so these communities can own their technological representation instead of just being consumers?
Great question, and obviously it's a real important and sometimes subtle challenge today. I mean, one of the things when I got access to GPT-4, I had it compose with a friend of mine who also had access poems in English and poems in Hindi, and then poems in English were translated in Hindi. And the poems in English and English translated in Hindi were better than the ones in Hindi because of data evaluation. So its pattern of reasoning within Hindi from a cultural context was clearly much more limited. And obviously Hindi is one of the ones where, there's more than many of other indigenous worldviews and languages. And the devices are kind of concatenations of culture. Now there's the human feedback learning. So having, kind of how is the reinforcement learning by human feedback, and how is that more broadly than just, kind of, because most of these systems are trained with, kind of call it graduate students from, not just the US, but, US and US-like, kind of universities. How do you do that? Now, if I could wave a wand and do something, it would be create kind of AI agents as data collectors, like to go have conversation with lots of indigenous folks in their native languages, to record that and get that into the recorded data set, to have that data set be much broader and more available from everything from training and reference as ways of doing it. And I think we would all benefit from doing that. That's probably the way that I would seek to do it, because today, given the predominance of, frankly, English within the internet, the vast majority of models, even how some of the Chinese are training and distilling their models, are using English as a pretty central point of view, which, by the way, we should use all. I'm not saying don't use English. I'm just saying, how do you get more, right? And a broader perspective in this. And so it would be awesome if that happens. I think at least a number of the frontier companies, care about this enough to make an effort to go hunting for data. I don't think they have the cycles to help record or create data, but those kind of recording and creating data, they would gladly integrate them into the models they're doing, because they're trying to be as broadly humanist as they can possibly be. Like the organizations I work with understand humanist doesn't mean North America, right? As an instance, it's broader than that. So anyway, it's a great question, and I hope that people are going to make progress towards it.
Before we close, I'd actually like to make one more question ask of you, if you don't mind. And that is, what's one thing you want our global community of educators to remember as they work to shape AI's role in education?
Great question. I guess what I would say is, to some degree, try to shift the things that are naturally fears around AI into curiosities. We as human beings naturally encounter new as fear. Is that rustle in the bushes? Is that a snake or a lion? Right. And there's good biological reasons for that initial thing, but
Yeah.
it's like, how do we it's like, when you say, hey, this is confronting a disruptive transformation as a challenge, it's like, well, how do you change that challenge, that challenge into opportunity? What are the things to do, like to be thinking about, what are the ways that we elevate and include, as per the last question, the broad swath of humanity in this? And what are the kind of curiosity in terms of how to use it and what to do? And look, we're going to be able to criticize AI forever, right? There's always, just like, for example, in computers and in energy and in everything else, every major thing, there's things that are broken, things that are limited, things that need to improve. But how do we approach it with curiosity? How do we approach it with agency? And how do you go, look, part of agency is I choose my agency to lean in, even as times they are changing.
No, I love that. So change your fears to curiosity. I think those are some great final words to leave us on, Reid.
Thank you, Reid, for launching this series with us with such generosity and insight. Absolutely incredible. So thank you very much.
Thank
Yeah.
you, and a big thank you to our AI Literacy Creator Collective community for joining us on today's journey through Reid's AI AAAs. Have a good evening, a good morning, or a good day wherever you are. Take
Yeah.
care.
Yeah.
Bye.